Hey, Cornerstone family. Well, we're in this new series looking at who is Jesus. And the way we answer this question has the power to set the course of our lives. So we need to wrestle, we need to grapple with it. And we're looking at the Gospel of John, where Jesus 7 times very clearly states who he is. We call them the I am statements. And so we're looking at this first one where he says, I am the bread of life. And what we're beginning to see is that Jesus is the only one who can satisfy our deepest hunger and deepest appetite. Our satisfaction spiritually and relationally can only be met in Jesus, only met in a relationship with him. You were made for relationship. I was made for a relationship. We're spiritual people. And when we begin to look for those desires to be met outside of Jesus, that's where things go off the rails for us. And Jesus came in order that we might have a relationship with him so that we can actually have this satisfaction in our lives, knowing him, walking with him, and living with him. And so to fill this out a little bit more, what I want to do in our brief time is I want to look at the 2 stories that led to Jesus saying, I am the bread of life. And for many, these are familiar stories. They're great stories, and they help fill the picture out a little bit. And there's 2 things really I want us to take away. It's simply this, that Jesus, the bread of life, can multiply our little, and Jesus, the bread of life, can calm our trouble. He multiplies our little, the little things that we can bring to him. He takes that, and he's inviting us to bring it to him, and he multiplies it. And then he's the one that can calm our trouble. He's inviting us to bring our trouble, and he can calm that because he has that kind of power. And he does this for his glory and for our joy. And so let's dive into this story, these 2 stories that lead to Jesus making this declaration of who he is. It's in John 6. And let me set the scene. Jesus is performing these miracles, healing the sick, and the crowd is growing. Their appetite for who Jesus is growing, and they're following him. And so this crowd is after Jesus. They want to know more. They want to see more. And what we can tell in the text is there's about 5,000 men, which means there's even more than that with the women and children, thousands upon thousands upon thousands that are following Jesus. And the story unfolds. Listen to this. It's John 6, beginning in verse 5. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? Jesus always has great questions, and it says this, Jesus said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. Philip's doing the math. He's looking at this extraordinary crowd. He's going, we don't have enough to make this happen. The math's not working out. Has that ever happened in your life where the math isn't working out? There's more month than there is money. There are more bills than there is bank. There's more rainy days than there is a rainy day fund, as somebody said. And has that happened to you? It's happened to all of us, where we kind of come to the end of ourselves. And Jesus is asking this question, how are we going to feed these people? Sometimes with the circumstances we're all facing here in 2020, circumstances none of us wanted to face. And here we are being squeezed by our circumstances, and we're going, man, where am I going to get the patience to walk through this? Where am I going to have the empathy to enter into other people's heartbreak and suffering and pain? Where will I find the empathy to do that? Where will I find the gentleness and kindness to love the people that God's put around me? Where will I find the joy to walk through these circumstances? And it's almost as if Jesus is asking that question. He knows we're being squeezed. He knows our circumstances, and he's going, where are you going to get the patience? You've just got a little bit, don't you? Where are you going to find the empathy? You've just got a tiny bit. Where are you going to find the love? And he's asking us this question. He's asking Philip that question, where are we going to get the bread? And then it goes on, because Jesus wants us to see something about himself. And the story goes on. This is how it goes. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many? And Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now there was grass in the place. So the men sat down, and there were about 5,000 in number. The thing that stands out about this passage is this little boy. He just emerges. I don't know how this all went down, but this little boy comes with his very, very small meal. And the detail that John says it's a barley loaf, this is the bread of the poor. So it's very, very little. There's not much here. You can imagine the mama of this boy packing this lunch for him to bring into his day. And as all mamas say, make sure you eat all of your lunch. I'm sure that's what my wife says to our kids when they would go off to school with their packed lunch. And here this little boy comes with very, very little, the lunch of the poor. And this is what he brings, is he's got a barley loaf. And then watch what Jesus does, because I think what Jesus is inviting us into is the little patience you have, the little empathy you have, the little kindness and gentleness, the little love that you have. He's saying, bring it to me. Bring it to me. It doesn't matter how little it is. Bring it to me. Just as this boy brings the loaf, and then it goes on. And the story unfolds. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, gather up the leftovers and the fragments, that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten them. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. They're going, we want more. Their appetite is growing. They want to understand more and more of who Jesus is. That's what this story is supposed to evoke, that he can take the little and he can multiply it, that there are leftovers. And I love kind of letting this story unfold in my own mind, because this little boy probably he headed back home. And I know when our kids get home from school, the question always is, 1, how was your day at school? And 2, did you eat all your lunch? I packed you lunch. And I have to wonder, this boy's bringing a basket back with some barley loaves. And the mom's like, you didn't eat your lunch? And he's like, no, I've got a story for you, Mom. I need to tell you what happened today. Somebody took the very little that we have and he multiplied it beyond anything we could possibly imagine. Jesus is inviting us to bring the little that we have, the little patience, the little empathy, the little joy, the little love that we have as these circumstances are squeezing in on us. And he's saying, bring it to me. I will multiply your little. That's what the bread of life does. That's what Jesus does. And so the next story right after this, this is one of my favorite stories. I love reading this to my kids at bed because the picture Bible makes it so vivid. This is what happens, and this is how it unfolds. It's beginning at verse 16. When evening came, Jesus' disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the Sea of Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. And the sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing, and they're fearful. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he then said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Here they are. They just saw this incredible miracle. They saw Jesus multiply the very little that was given to him, and now they're fearful. They're overwhelmed with their circumstances. They're being squeezed in by this storm that's overtaking them, and there is Jesus. And what they begin to see is that Jesus is the one that calms that storm. He calms our trouble. Listen to this quote I came across from Eugene Peterson. He puts it this way: all the water in the oceans cannot sink a ship unless it gets inside. Nor can all the trouble in the world harm us unless it gets within us. Jesus is inviting us to bring our trouble to him. I know as we are going through the craziness of 2020 that we're feeling squeezed. Our patience is running thin. Anger and frustration is coming up. We're all feeling it. This is not the way we wanted it to go. We're grieving the loss of vacations, the loss of those around us, of the loss of normal. We're grieving that. We want it back so bad. And we have this trouble that just is squeezing us. And what Jesus is saying, give it to me, bring it to me. Because here's what happens is when it begins to squeeze, when that trouble around us squeezes us, it can get into us. If we don't bring it to him, that trouble can get into us and it can sink us. It can sink our relationships. It can sink the church. It can sink our communities. And Jesus is saying, bring it to me. Bring it to me. Because if we do, it won't sink us. It has no power over us. We can walk through this world with great trouble knowing what Jesus has done. He is the bread of life who has died and rose again. in order to empower us and strengthen us to live for him, for his glory, and to encounter his joy in our lives. And so with all of that said, what I want to just invite us as we go in to this day and to the rest of our week is simply to, maybe you just need to have a moment of silence and prayer and say, Jesus, you are the bread of life and you can multiply my little. And so I bring to you the little love, the little patience, the little kindness and empathy I feel. And would you multiply it? Would you make it more like your kindness, your empathy, your love, your joy? And then say, Jesus, the bread of life, I bring my troubles. Would you calm my troubles? And then let's watch what he does. Let's watch the one who says, I am the bread of life. Let us see his power at work in our lives as he satisfies every one of our desires, because that's who he is. And so let us do that for his glory, and let us watch the joy that he produces within us, knowing that Jesus is the one that multiplies our living and he calms our trouble. Amen.